Big thanks to Reverend Shannon, who started our series last week, really talking about this power of hope. I found myself really leaning into that this past week and finding it to be just this really good medicine for my soul in so many different ways. I really love that we're utilizing this book, Hope Matters, by Ellen Kelsey, for this series, just because this idea of hope just feels so deeply relevant to this time we're living in. I have to say, y'all, like hope feels like a superpower these days. It's like something I feel like we're all being called to cultivate and discover within a little bit more because, hey fam, let's be real. Let's name it. It's been a very intense couple of years, right? And I know we're in this really interesting time where it feels kind of like we're at mile 22 of a 26-mile marathon. Like we have gone a far way, but we still have a little ways to go. Like, not that I actually know what running a marathon is actually like. I'm not much of a run. Like I've never understood like just running. I played sports growing up, so I have to be like chasing a ball like a dog all the time. But I say that because like it's been an incredibly challenging time, y'all, and we still have a little ways to go. And as we approach this challenge, right, of climate justice, and any challenge, right, whether that challenge is personal or interpersonal or global, like at some point, if we want to become a part of the solution, right, if we want to meet our challenge or even greet, practitioner Helen Ohm introduced me to that idea that we can even like greet the challenges before us. We're going to have to do so in a way that cultivates this idea and this feeling and this experience of hope. At some point, we're going to have to allow hope to enter our being to help us create a vision for the future that brings us out of any feeling of like apathy or overwhelm or despair, or like taking our frustration and projecting that onto others, or just seething with anger, right? Like if we're to move forward in a grounded way with like this steady action that I know is what is required for so many things, like we're gonna have to lean into this idea of hope a little bit more and actually like utilize it as a spiritual practice. And so as we're continuing this series, as we're talking about hope, it reminded me of this passage by Dr. Ernest Holmes, who gave this talk on his radio program called This Thing Called Life. This particular passage was given in August of 1950. It was during the Korean War, a war that my grandfather actually served in. His words feel relevant now, just as relevant now as they did back then. So I want to read you a passage from that. He says, "The world is perhaps at the point of the greatest crisis in all human history, and there seem to be two attitudes that we can assume. One is calmness, faith, and conviction, and the other would be despair. And despair is unthinkable. Let each, in their own way, dedicate their time, their service, their hope, and their spiritual conviction to the common cause of liberty and justice for all. And let's work without tiring and pray without ceasing." And this is what he goes on to say. "We know that something alive with meaning is taking place. Something vibrant with hope is happening. Something latent with the possibility of the future is being conceived." I love that so much. Something alive with meaning, something vibrant with hope, something latent with possibility. I just want to just like bask in these words right now. And I invite us all to do that. Like I invite us all to really lean into like this latent hope, this possibility that is so available to us if we just allow it to enter into our being. Because if we can name the challenge that's in front of us without becoming overwhelmed by it, like through this power of hope, like I have no doubt we will meet our personal and collective challenges and then even come to see that these challenges can actually lead us to a better and brighter future, right? Like a future that we can actually feel proud of being a part of and that we did a small part in helping to create. So Rebecca and I, my wife Rebecca and I, we attended the Parliament of World Religions a couple years ago. This is a conference that has been bringing together faith leaders from all around the world for like 100 years. It was one of my bucket list items, and it was one of the most powerful events that I've ever been to. Now that I've gone once, I just want to go again and again and again, and they meet every 3 or 4 years. And what I noticed, like at this last conference, it was super interesting because one of the main themes and topics that was coming through almost every presentation I went to was this issue of climate change, right? And I also noticed there were like people that weren't part of the faith world that were there. There were scientists and climate scientists there and biologists. There were, there were a ton of representatives from the United Nations that were there giving presentations. There were also like authors and activists. Margaret Atwood was there, y'all, and Rebecca and I were just like, oh my God, there she is. And we kind of like stealth selfied her with her in the background. Like she doesn't know she's in a picture with us, but she totally is. But it was amazing to see this wide, array of representatives there. And, when you went to some of these presentations, these scientists came to us recognizing like, yeah, it's probably kind of weird that we're here. You may ask like what we're doing here. And what they came to realize is like all of the work that they are doing, all of the science that they are discovering, just presenting that data isn't enough. That they realized that like they needed to come together with people in the world that can help influence culture and that can help that kind of transformation happen. There's this Gus Spieth, who is the former dean of the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies at Yale. He's been widely attributed to saying these words that I think really captured what these scientists were saying to us. He said, I used to think that the top environmental problems were biodiversity loss, ecosystem collapse, and climate change. I thought that 30 years of good science could address these problems. I was wrong. The top environmental problems are selfishness, greed, and apathy. And to deal with these, we need a cultural and spiritual transformation. And we scientists don't know how to do that. I'm so struck by this statement, right? Just like I was struck by how all those United Nations representatives and climate scientists were there at the Parliament of World Religions, and like just calling out to the faith leaders, humbly like recognizing the limits to the scope of their work and how they were asking us to join them and to becoming that so that we all could play our little part in knowing what was really going to be needed for us to make this big leap that we're all, I think, being called to be a part of right now. The author, Ellen Kelsey, who wrote the book Hope Matters, she speaks to this phenomenon too, and how like scientific data, no matter how sound, isn't enough to shift our behavior. In fact, it's much more, like we are, as humans, we are much more influenced by our relationships and the people in our direct circles that have an influence on us. She says, in our hyper-connected world, we see what our friends and other people we relate to are doing, and this is a powerful lever for environmental change. The beliefs of the groups we see ourselves as part of have more influence on what we do than the words of a scientific expert, no matter how well-informed. If Facebook and Twitter has taught me anything, it's that often like sound science and peer-reviewed research can be totally ineffective. Has anyone else experienced this? Like, I'm no longer sharing articles anymore, thinking that like that will be the thing that like changes whatever this person's mind on any subject, right? Like, that's not going to do anything. It actually may even drive a wedge between us a little bit more. So like, I'm not doing that anymore. I'm not trying to prove you wrong with all of these articles, no matter how sound they are. What I have found, though, where I have seen little changes, is if I like spend more time and more energy with empathy, with listening, with actually valuing this relationship, this Facebook relationship, enough to like spend a little bit more time having these conversations that actually foster tough conversations. It seems to matter much more than all of the facts that maybe drive me, but maybe aren't the same same facts that someone else may be being exposed to, right? So when I think about the context of all this, y'all, it feels like we're all like being called to a deeper spiritual identity right now. Like it's a calling for me into this deeper place of oneness, right? Which I know is this woo-woo thing, but it's real, right? And I feel like it's one of the things that is really guiding us right now. Like, and it's asking me to not just like say I believe in oneness, but to really live it out in a different way. Like, so if we really seek to discover this place within, like where the divine abides, and come to find that that same place exists within every person, within every plant and animal and living thing on this planet, and in fact, like in the planet itself, like if we take that seriously, if we take that this divine energy is a part of everyone and everything, like it's very natural. Like what comes after that very naturally is this care for this earth we're on, which is ultimately, let's be real, like a care for our future children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, for the animals and species that are going extinct, for the most vulnerable among us, right? Which we know social justice and environmental justice are also meeting right now, because we know that the people that will be the most impacted and are already being the most impacted by climate justice, or by climate change rather, are the ones that are most vulnerable already, right? So you can't separate social justice and environmental justice. It's all connected. It's all interrelated. And in fact, it's bringing some of those things to the fore even more. All of the inequities are going to be shown to us even more, right? So what this points to for me is this truth of the interconnectedness of all things, right? And that's this concept that I actually first learned about when I was studying Buddhism in college. Sharon Salzberg, who's a Buddhist teacher that I follow, and that I actually got to meet and hang out with when I was living at the Shambhala Mountain Center in Red Feather Lakes, Colorado, she says these words about the interconnectedness of all things. She says, in the Buddhist tradition, bodhisattvas are those who, aspiring to enlightenment, make a resolve. They say, I vow to attain full enlightenment for the sake of all sentient beings. That is a pretty incredible vow. It means that we recognize our own liberation is intertwined with the liberation of all beings, without exception. It means that rather than seeing other beings as adversaries, we must see them as colleagues in this endeavor of freedom. Rather than viewing others with fear or contempt, which arises from a belief in separation, we see them as part of who we selves are. Seeing the truth of this fundamental interconnectedness is what is known as in the Eightfold Path as right view. The right view. Sociologist Brené Brown, who also has a deep spiritual life of her own, also talks about how spirituality is actually defined by interconnection, right? Spirituality is defined by interconnection. And she even takes it a step further by recognizing that this interconnection is in fact like inextricable. And when you look at that word inextricable, it simply means impossible to separate impossible to escape from. It's a bold statement, right? That there's a part of me that recognizes its truth. Like, even though we humans, we love to feel like we can just separate ourselves, sort ourselves, divide ourselves up into us and them, right? Into those who are with us and those who are against us, and to those who matter and to those who maybe don't. When it comes down to it, right? Like, the truth is that we are all connected. We all share the same planet, whether we like it or not. So for Brené Brown, like, it's this feeling of disconnection. It's this experience of disconnection that is at the core of what's going on. And if we value like our spiritual health, if we really care about our spiritual identity, like, we have to courageously find our way back to one another. Like, that's where we're being called. So this is what she says. This is from her book. I think this is from Braving the Wilderness. She says, when I look through the 200,000 plus pieces of data my team and I have collected over the past 15 years, I can only conclude that our world is in a collective spiritual crisis. This is especially true if you think about that core definition of spirituality from my last book, The Gifts of Imperfection. She says, spirituality is recognizing and celebrating that we are all inextricably connected to each other by a power greater than all of us, and that our connection to that power and to one another is grounded in love and compassion. She goes on to say, right now, we are neither recognizing nor celebrating our inextricable connection. We are divided from others in almost every areas of our life. We're not showing up with one another in a way that acknowledges our connection. Cynicism and distrust have a stranglehold on our hearts. Addressing this crisis will require a tremendous amount of courage. Courage. Spirituality is recognizing that we're all inextricably connected by a power greater than us. And the way that we come back to experiencing this connection to that power, like our access point to that and to each other, is through this idea of love and compassion, right? And if we're going to do that, like if we're going to find our way back to each other, it's going to take some courage, right? Which is something that Reverend Shannon spoke to last week. And I love how she said this. She says, it takes courage to forgive others. It takes courage to forgive ourselves. It takes courage to love another human being no matter what. It takes courage to be present and to stay with our feelings and to stay present to them without numbing or checking out. That takes courage. So courage and hope, like love and compassion, these are the things I feel like are being called forth from us right now. It feels like right now, this is what I'm here to experience. Are these things. Can you all feel that a little bit too? Like I can feel this in my bones. I can feel like these are the things that we are being called into experiencing right now. And I can feel like when I'm connected to something greater than myself as well, like something within me awakens. Something within me comes alive, right? Like when I give myself to that inextricable connection, like when I really give myself to that, and it often comes through love and compassion. When I begin to feel that connection, that inextricable connection to others, even to others I would rather not be inextricably connected with. Like when I feel that same connection is also present to the planet itself, to these amazing trees that surround us, to every living thing, to the heartbeat of the universe itself. Like I realize, like when I do that, that is a spiritual experience. Like that is the greatest definition of any spiritual experience I've ever had. Is just simply like that, wow, like I'm connected to everyone and everything throughout time. Past, present, and future. That is my deepest, most truest identity. That to me is the greatest expression of a spiritual experience that I think I have ever had. Right? So when it comes to climate change, or moving towards climate justice, right? If we are deeply moving into our spiritual identity as one with all that is, it asks us to like understand what the implications of that are, right? Because where I'm coming from right now, when I look out into the world, it seems like every challenge that we're going through now, y'all, every crisis that we are experiencing, as painful it is to look at, and even more painful to experience sometimes, it feels like it's directly pointing us back to this inextricable connection. Like global climate change, so many ways pointing us back to that inextricable connection. Heck, this global pandemic pointing us back to our inextricable connection. Like in plain sight, it's showing us how inextricably connected we all are. So, what do we do with this knowledge, this understanding? Helen Kelsey, in this last part of her book, she simply says, like, we must be a place of hope for others. So we have to lean into this shared identity a little bit and recognize that, like, as we we create hope for ourselves, as we hold this place, like we can bring others along with us, right? And we can do so from a place that allows action to then come from that, right? That knows that like hope is what is going to bring us forward. It's what's going to change behavior. It's not the fighting or destruction of another, right? And this is what she says. She says, over the past few decades, there has been a dramatic increase in the number of research studies exploring the role of emotions in behavior change. And what those studies reveal is that feelings of pride or compassion, or that you are part of something meaningful, are much more likely to keep you engaged and change your behavior than if someone that is telling you there is no hope. Princeton University research demonstrates that emphasizing the pride people feel when they make an environmentally conscious decision is a better way to promote eco-friendly behavior than making people feel guilty for not living sustainably. Y'all, it turns out that in spirituality and in life, guilt is not very effective at producing transformation. Perhaps some of us have a firsthand experience of that. But hope, compassion, love, creating relationships, especially with those who might not be a part of this climate justice movement in the same way we are, like that's what creates change. It's just actual connection with others, which starts with the understanding that we're already connected anyways. And so really all it is, it's a call to live out that understanding, to live out that truth, to be a place and to be a person that believes so deeply in interconnection that we have the boldness and audacity to actually live it out in all of the ways that it's being called for us to live out. So friends, I truly believe like we're being called to this very moment by the same power that unites us all, that lives within us, that reminds us that there are no enemies when it comes to this shared existence of living on this planet. There are no political parties. There are no battles that can be won if that battle is aimed at the destruction of another. Like instead, we are being reminded that through this most interesting time we are living in, we are just being reminded of our shared identity, of our oneness, and our inextricable connection. It's through this kind of spiritual lens that these challenges become the very thing that lead us back home. Like that meditation song of saying, I am home, like perhaps what is guiding us home right now, back to ourselves, back to each other, back to the one, is simply this recognition that like, hey, y'all, we're all in this together anyways. And perhaps some of our suffering is coming from the belief in something else or the belief in separation. And so maybe we can just come back to this inextricable connection and live our lives from that place. Perhaps, y'all, perhaps we've all prayed for this time. Perhaps the peace that was envisioned, perhaps the world that was envisioned in those movements in the 60s, perhaps all the aspirations we have to truly, truly create a world that works for everyone, like perhaps that is all being manifested through these very challenges we're facing right here, right now. So we don't have to run away from them. We don't have to be scared of them. We don't have to wish everything was different. We can simply meet, nay, we can actually greet these things that are before us and know that like they're leading us somewhere. They're actually leading us back home, and they're leading us back to each other. So I want to close today with some words from indigenous climate activist Shu Tescadal Martinez. He gave these words to the United Nations General Assembly on Climate Change in June of 2015. He was just 15 years old at the time. This is what he says. He says, "This life is a gift, and it is our responsibility to respect and protect that which gives us life. Every generation leaves a mark on this planet. We leave something behind to be remembered by. And we are at a tipping point right now. where we will either be remembered as the generation that destroyed the planet, as a generation that put profits before future, or as a generation that united to address the greatest issue of our time by changing our relationship with the earth. We're being called upon to use our courage, to use our innovation and our creativity and our passion to bring forth a new world. So in the light of this collapsing world that we see, what better time to be born than now? Or better time to be alive than now? Because this generation, we get to change the course of history. Humans have created the greatest crisis that we see on the planet, and the greater the challenge, the higher we will rise to overcome it.